In a past episode of The Big Bang Theory, the friends pool their resources and buy themselves a time machine. Not a real time machine, mind you, but a replica of one from the film version of H.G. Wells' classic tale. It is a faithful representation of the device that Rod Taylor used in the 1960 film. The lights on the control stand work, and the large disc behind the operator's seat spins. Now, does the machine vanish from Sheldon's apartment and take him into the future for a real encounter with the Morlocks? Of course not. But he falls asleep while sitting at the controls and dreams that he lands in the Morlocks' time with very funny results. To my knowledge, no time machine actually exists, although there have been some interesting scientific theories concerning the idea. One would be that a jump into the future might be possible, but one into the past would be fraught with dangers. The grandfather paradox, for example. The paradox suggests that if you return to the past and killed your grandfather, you wouldn't be born. So, how could you travel back there in the first place? Sort of a catch-22, if you will. But there are scientists like Ronald Mallet, a physicist at the University of Connecticut, who was trying to create the conditions for time travel in a very simple experiment. Now, that was some years back, and I don't know the results, but I think it's safe to assume that there have been no major breakthroughs. Very few scientists in the past would have openly discussed the subject, fearing ridicule from their peers. Today, it's a much more tolerant climate for explorations of what was once considered science fiction. Now, with the string theory, multiple universes, and quantum physics being discussed, the time seems ripe to further explore more of the unknown, like time travel. But we are an impatient species. Sometimes we cheat, not willing to take the time to invent a machine to take us into the future, or a doorway that leads from one place in time to another. We look for those around us who may have an inside track to what lies ahead. Our discussion would not be complete without mentioning some of the films that have been made with that theme of time travel. I'm sure you are familiar with some of these. Back to the Future, Parts 1, 2, and 3. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Buck Rogers in the 25th Century. Doctor Who. The Highlander series of films. Lost in Space. Peggy Sue Got Married. Planet of the Apes. The Philadelphia Experiment. Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, and the Star Trek episode All Good Things. The Terminator franchise. The film 12 Monkeys, and now the TV series Continuum. I know, I've left a few out, and for good reason. For example, there was an experiment that took place in time some years back. It was on June 27th, 1912, that an experiment in time took place. Not a real experiment, mind you. It was the date that Christopher Reeve's character chooses in the film Somewhere in Time to visit the woman of his dreams, played by Jane Seymour. I watched the film thinking it appropriate for our discussion of time. Who wouldn't want to travel back in time to a romantic hotel like the Grand? If you haven't seen the film, I recommend you do. Dr. Ethel S. Person spoke of the film in her book Dreams of Love and Fateful Encounters, The Power of Romantic Passion. She writes, and I quote, "A writer, Christopher Reeve, allowed back into the past, falls in love with a young actress, played by Jane Seymour, and decides to stay in the past rather than return to a present without her. For most people versed in psychoanalysis, the underlying fantasy from which Laura and Somewhere in Time draw their strength would seem to be that of impossible love, which is magically realized. Fantasies in which seemingly impenetrable barriers are penetrated. End quote. In the case of Somewhere in Time, the barrier itself is time, and its crossing simply a matter of willing it to be so. But it doesn't always work that easily. Time travel is fraught with paradoxes, and some things can never be returned. Robert James Waller in The Bridges of Madison County wrote, "In a universe of ambiguity, this kind of certainty only comes once and never again, no matter how many lifetimes you live." It is interesting to take a look at the devices that were used in the movies. In Back to the Future, it was a DeLorean automobile. It figures that Doc and Marty McFly would choose an out-of-date automobile, one that would never survive to make it into the future in real life. I mentioned the device in H.G. Wells' classic story. In the Big Bang Theory episode, Sheldon had to use his imagination to believe that he was really traveling through time. That wasn't far from the truth concerning how Christopher Reeve went into the past in Somewhere in Time. It didn't happen right away, but eventually he was able to make the crossing, and this is how he found out about the method. He goes to visit an old professor of his at university, the author of Travels Through Time, G. Finney. Finney tells him, in response to his question, "Is time travel possible?" that he was once in the Hotel del Vecchio in Venice. He says you can feel you're back in time in a hotel that has preserved some of its past in its decorations and setting. He tried to hypnotize himself, and he believes he may have traveled back to 1572 Venice by simply believing that's where he was, with nothing from the present to distract him from believing he was really there. He suggests to Christopher Reeve to move everything from the present out of sight if he wishes to try this experiment. Reeve goes back to the hotel, purchases some period clothes, or what he thinks is the right clothing for the time, and some money from an old coin dealer. He even cuts his hair to suit old photos. He will say to her, "Evening, Miss McKenna. You don't know me, but you will." In a poignant reunion scene that shows the hotel in its best light in Somewhere in Time, Reeves and Seymour go back to her room and they make love by candlelight. Next day, early, they are sitting on the floor together, and she asks the time and about the pocket watch which he hands over. She tells him his clothes are about 15 years old for the time. He gets up to say that he likes the outfit with its many pockets, and while searching the pocket he finds a 1979 Lincoln penny, which is from another time, and it is that which sends him back to his own time. He sees, as if through a fading tunnel, her screaming as she realizes he is disappearing before her very eyes. He awakens in her room, but in the present. He goes back to his room and tries to return, but to no avail. He has spent 3 days back in time. He's a man lost in his own time now. He goes back to the room and doesn't eat for a week. The hotel staff find him near death, and in the final few moments of the film, he does, and goes to meet Elisa McKenna waiting for him in the light. It's one thing to go back in time, but most of us would want to return to the present. Time travelers are not only flesh and blood. There are many things that travel into the future with us. We go to antique shops looking for one piece from the past that speaks to us. Uncomfortable with the modern style of furniture, we might like to decorate our homes and cottages with relics from the past. Also, the longer we keep something, it too will slowly make its way into the future. Barbara Milo-Orbach from Antiques at Home wrote this about some of the furniture we love. And I quote, "These pieces travel with us through our lives, growing older with a special grace." End quote. Nostalgia has become big business for the baby boom generation. The musicians who defined our collective past are making a comeback. They may no longer be able to fill stadiums, but it is intimate to see them on a much smaller scale. I spoke of the possibility of time travel to the future, but it may exist in the here and now about time travel to the past. Music has the ability to transport us back to a simpler time when all seemed right with the world and we were young and in love. Dr. Ethel Esperson, in her wonderful book, Dreams of Love and Fateful Encounters, goes on to write, "In love, there is a desire to generate endless time. The lovers luxuriate in the freedom to linger, and nothing else seems so valuable. One retrieves the present tense in love. Only the present matters. Past and future are dispensable, irrelevant. Love is valuable for the feeling it evokes in the present, not for its use in generating future yields. Time is reckoned by love's calendar, where there is only before and ever since. Moments when the lovers are together are experienced as timeless, but in separation they seem endless. One is willing to wish one's life away if time would only pass in order to be reunited. As Shakespeare's Cleopatra pleads, "Give me to drink mandragora, that I might sleep out the great gap of time my Antony is away." Even when the lovers come together, there is an obsession not only with each other, but with time. Promises are cast in terms of future assurances that the love will last forever. The specter overshadowing love is the fear that it will end. If you are a member of my Facebook page, Heartbeat of the Internet, then you might have an idea where all this came from. A few days back, I finally saw the film The Time Traveler's Wife. I've been meaning to read the book, but one of my page members said the book itself may be a little difficult to follow, with all the jumping around from time to time. The story is much easier to follow in the film version that starred Rachel McAdams and Eric Bana. I think we're all familiar with the body of work that has made up Rachel McAdams' career. You might be wondering, though, about Eric Bana. He played the leading role in the Steven Spielberg thriller Munich, about Israeli assassins taking revenge on those who killed the athletes at the Olympic Games. In The Time Traveler's Wife, he plays a more gentle role, and it suits him. The film is based on the book by Audrey Niffenegger. Claire and Henry have known each other for a very long time, but the problem with their friendship and eventual marriage is the fact that Henry keeps disappearing, literally, sometimes for days on end. He describes it as a tingling feeling that goes throughout his body, and then he is simply gone. He vanishes. He has no control over this. He's been doing it since about 6 years of age. One of the myths the story erases about time travel is the fact that one is able to go back in time and meet him or her at a much younger age. The first movie in the new Star Trek franchise has an older Spock bumping into his younger self just before the conclusion of the film. Old time traveler myths led us to believe that the past and future person could not occupy the same space in time. We're not told why this happens to Henry, but we feel Claire's pain as she tries to come to grips with his reality. The film is a poignant love story that is well worth a second look. The ending was not a surprise to me. If you have yet to see it, I will tell you this much. The ending is well worth the price of admission. Which leads me to conclude, we are all time travelers on a road that leads into a future. The only difference between real life and science fiction is the fact that our time travel is not completed in a single jump. We are given the opportunity to savor the journey a moment at a time. Have a great day and a good night filled with many sweet dreams.